Welcome back to El Pida, a podcast that spreads hope and awareness about incarceration. I'm your host, Ariadne Brempu, and today's episode will cover the conditions within prisons in the United States. It will feature Bonnie Kerness, the program director of an American Friends Service committee called Prison Watch. She became an anti-racism activist at the mere age of 14 and has devoted her life ever since to human rights. Primarily, she's worked to better the lives of those incarcerated under Prison Watch. She's also contributed to many publications such as Torture in the U.S. Prisons, Evidence of U.S. Human Rights Violations. So, grab your headphones, settle in, and let's get into it. What was it like living during the Civil Rights era?
I was very young. My early observations of the civil rights era and oppression in this country began when I was 12. That was the Supreme Court decision desegregating the schools. And I would watch the news on a small television screen, and watch children getting hosed and treated terribly for just trying to go to school. These were African children. That was when I was 12. When I was 14, Emmett Till was murdered. And at that point, I knew I would become part of that civil rights era. I went down south. I worked I worked with the NAACP in Memphis, who trained young, white, very dopey kids to become organizers, social workers, whatever register people for voting, whatever was needed. And it was very frightening. It was the beginning, I think, of my generation, my whole generation's understanding of the role of law enforcement in this country, because many of the young people at the time were killed by law enforcement. And as groups emerged, as the Black Panthers emerged when I was in my, young 20s, 1920, as the Young Lords, as the Chicano movement, as the American Indian movement, as the Black Liberation Army, as all of these groups, the Puerto Rican independence movement, all of these groups emerged, pushed forward by young people. Very many of those young people were killed, whether it was by state troopers on Kent and Jackson state campuses, or Fred Hampton in Chicago, just shot by city police, or Zaid Mohammed killed by New Jersey state troopers. Those that weren't killed very often were placed in prisons. Sometimes they absolutely committed crimes, and sometimes they did not. I think we also began to understand the politics of prisons. So it was, I think for young people, it was a frightening time. It was also a time of comradeship and community.
And following that, what was neo-slavery?
Well, the 13th Amendment did not abolish slavery. There's an exception clause. So slavery was abolished except for people in prison. So when people use the term neo-slavery, that's what they're talking about. There is slavery in prisons because prisoners get paid very little and they all work. And sometimes they're even leased out. And I think we're going to see more of this as as the country pushes its immigrant population out. In one state in the South, a couple of years back, the farmers made an agreement with the Department of Corrections to lease people in prison to work the farms, and they would pay the Department of Corrections. So that prisons are a form of slavery in many ways.
Do you think that the prison industrial complex is the reason why we have so much over incarceration in the United States?
Well, when you say the prison industrial complex, we're talking about county jails. We're talking about state prisons. We're talking about federal prisons. And then we're talking about private medical providers. They have started a system where in order to write to a prisoner you have to send it to a private mail company. So the letter can be scanned and then sent to the prisoner. That's privatization. Commissary is very often privatization. So there is, it is a huge industry that is largely created off the backs of Black and brown people.
And what are some other examples of the prison labor you were talking about?
In New Jersey, I can remember one time when my children were young, picking up a garbage can in their school and looking at the bottom of it because a prisoner had just written to me that that's what he was working on. And sure enough, so it's made by prisoners in the Department of Corrections. So the state pays the state for various products. Every prisoner works in one form or another, whether it's the kitchen, whether it's the laundry, whether it's cleaning the floors. So there, whatever is needed to be done to keep the prison functioning, the prisoners do.
And more often than not, are they paid?
They're paid minimally. At one point in New Jersey, I think in the women's prison, they were making the uniforms that all prisoners have to wear, the orange jumpsuits. And I think they were paid 23 cents an hour at that time. I don't know what it is right now, but it's not much more than that.
What conditions do the prisoners suffer in the meantime?
Conditions of confinement vary from poor nutrition, poor medical care, unreasonable movement, on double selling to abuse. In 21, there was a prime example of that abuse in the women's prison when, for reasons that have never come out, they make no sense, 12 guards went into the solitary confinement unit of the women's prison and beat them. And we had pictures. I got, that was a Wednesday, Thursday night, Martin Luther King weekend. And Saturday morning, I got a letter at my house saying, help, they're killing us. That was it. So we banged on every door we could. The guards were investigated, tried, convicted. And one of the things that came out of that particular incident was a board of trustees for the women's prison. So that, and I'm on that board of trustees, I can go on to that campus anytime I want, go into any unit I want, talk to any imprisoned woman that I want. And that's unique in the country.
What are some other ways the guards treat incarcerated women?
I think you can't make, well, right now, they treat them very well because they're being monitored by civilians and community people. In New Jersey, we are attempting, and I hopefully succeeding in getting a board of trustees for the men's prisons. But this is one of the reasons community oversight of prisons is crucial. And very often, the only people providing that community oversight are family members. So the American Friends Service Committee Prison Watch program does a lot of work with family members, and we receive mail, phone calls, testimonies of what's going on in New Jersey prisons, and very often in prisons throughout the country. And take whatever steps are available to us. In New Jersey, there are people we can call who will respond. In other states, not so much.
And I know another form of abuse in prison is no-touch torture. Can you explain what that is?
That's solitary confinement, and it's extreme solitary confinement. And it was born out of the civil rights era. So we're circling back around. Very often, when the members of those radical groups, radical and revolutionary groups, found themselves in prisons, they were placed in extreme solitary confinement without charges. So there was no beginning, middle, and an end to the time they spent in solitary because the Department of Corrections, the government, did not want them teaching, did not want them educating people politically.
What are the impacts of no-touch torture?
Trauma. Prison is trauma in itself. And the use of extreme solitary confinement. We have one volunteer at our office who spent 22 years in solitary confinement. I did over the years see a difference between people, political people, placed in solitary confinement coming out without trauma because they understood what the government was trying to do, as opposed to throwing a 22-year-old or in long-term solitary confinement. And they have suffered terribly from trauma. And I've even had one young man who I worked with for almost a year. They released him from solitary after 7 or 8 years of it, and he couldn't adjust. He would come out, they would release him, and he'd call me and he would say, people are staring at me. People are following me. This is in a prison. Of course, people are following him. It's a crowded situation. He could not adjust. He placed himself in solitary confinement.
Do you think that less extreme versions are a necessary measure?
Well, I'm going to use the word abolition. I don't believe in prisons as the United States runs them today. There are other models. If you look at the Scandinavian prisons, they do not use very many of the very cruel methods that we use. There is education, there are private rooms, there are computers. You know, I think one of the things that advocates work on, especially those of us who are abolitionists and don't believe in prisons as they are now, is decarceration, to get as many people out as we possibly can. So for instance, during the era of COVID, we pushed the state legislature to pass the Public Health Emergency Act, which basically said during a public health emergency, all people within a year of release should be released at that point. Between 5,000 and 8,000 people got out of New Jersey prisons. We halved the prison population at that time. Right now, we're working on legislation called rehabilitative release, where if you have gone into prison when you were 20 or 21 or 22, and have served 20 years, and or you're in your 60s and 70s, it's mandated that the court takes another look at your sentence. And in most cases, we're hoping that the judges agree with us that they don't belong in prison. The women's prison facility in New Jersey is extremely old. So we are building a new women's prison. And that prison is going to be what they call the Norway model. And that model has, instead of a day room, having 4 metal chairs and a metal table, in huge rooms. The furniture is going to be what they call normative. So it's going to be couches. Why not? It's going to be appropriate lighting. Why not? It's going to have books in the day rooms. Why not? I mean, these are such, logical things. So there are places and spaces in the country that are changing the model.
Can you explain how rounding up gangs is being used to expand the solitary confinement population?
Solitary confinement began as a political tool to keep people from teaching. And then we saw the expansion of it in the 90s. A lot of money came down for the expansion of solitary confinement. So they developed communications management units, and that was for Muslims. The management control units remained for political people. They came up with security threat group management units, which were also solitary confinement. And they herded young Black and brown men into these units, claiming that they were gang members without investigation. It was just a way to get federal money to create these huge solitary confinement units. There was a young man in New Jersey, his name was Omar Broadway, and he paid a guard to bring him a camera, a video camera. And you can go on YouTube and find, I think it's called an Omar Broadway film. And in that film, he's got any number of clips of the abuse that these young people endured for no reason.
What letters did the AFSC begin receiving regarding those units?
Well, we receive letters from, all units in prison. One of the things, the descriptions we got on the conditions of that kind of confinement led us to publish something called the Survivor's Manual, written by and for people living in prison. So it's a wonderful book that, describes things like meditation, Tai Chi, ways to survive the horrors of solitary confinement. And it's the ways that people have survived are often very smart, very beautiful, and they've shared that. So we send out hundreds, hundreds every year.
What happened to Darren Rainey?
Well, I would have to uh, look back. That was a number of years ago when we did get a letter from Darren Rainey. Or no, not from Darren. We got a letter from other people in the prison. And he had been locked in a shower stall, and the water supply was hosed into the cage and was controlled by guards, and it was hot water that they were spraying him with. So he had burns on 90% of his body. Very often when we get letters like this, they're accompanied by artwork. So that I have drawings, for instance, of a man going through dialysis, and they have him masked, and they have him, chained and shackled, and a black box. Black box weighs 20 pounds, and it hangs beneath the chains. I mean, it's just additional cruelty for no reason. Darren and other nameless people, suffer terribly. They're tortured. And we, the people, we, the community, don't see it. And unless somebody gets word out to us, we don't know about it, so we cannot form opposition to this kind of oppression.
What about Frank Hunter?
Frank Hunter was a New Jersey prisoner. He had a lot of mental health issues, and the guards would make him dance for his food. They would make him dance for a shower. I mean, again, the treatment was beyond cruel.
What was Ojere's experience in the NJ State Prisons Management Control Unit?
Ojeri Lutulo was a member of the Black Liberation Army. He was a revolutionary. That army, in a lot of ways, was connected with the Black Panther Party. He was arrested, tried, convicted, and spent almost all of his time in the management control unit in New Jersey State Prison. That management control unit was literally opened for a man named Sundiata Acoli. Sundiata was one of the Panthers, along with Assata Shakur and Zaid Muhammad, who was shot. He was a Panther riding on the state highway in New Jersey, and got arrested, tried, and convicted by an all-white jury. And they opened up a control unit for him. And we know this because years ago, a guard wrote a book telling the story of that. So Ojeri spent 22 years in solitary confinement, and the American Friends Service Committee Prison Watch Program monitored him for all of those 20 years, 22 years, accepting phone calls whenever we could. He was not physically abused at all. He was allowed out maybe once or twice a week for exercise, but it is, I mean, though the management control units were the initial units, and they were literally the experiment with no-touch torture.
Now, are there any differences between how children and adults are treated while in the system?
Well, there are huge differences, but it's, it's the system, that we want to get rid of. And the system is racist. The system is classist. So it's not, we don't only focus on treatment, we focus on, how people get into the system. I mean, that's another part of, that's the court, the police system of who they arrest and how they arrest them. It's the court system of, how people are tried or not. Very often these young people are forced into a plea deal, which means they agree to say they're guilty. And young people being young people, very often they don't want the plea deal because they're not guilty. So they choose to go to trial, where they end up with these very, very long sentences. And very often juveniles are what's called waived up, so that they're tried as adults and they end up in adult prisons. And when I talked about the rehabilitative release bill before, it is that group of young people, and they're not young anymore, but it's that group of young people who were waived up that we want out now. They're in their 50s. And we want them home.
Based on your speech at Quinnipiac Law School, what are some shocking things you've heard about children enduring while incarcerated?
I can read you some quotes. We years ago had a youth program, and one day while the young people were up there, I just pulled them into my office, one by one, and interviewed them about their experience. And we came up with a booklet called Our Children's House. And what I wasn't prepared for was, as they told me their stories, the trauma that was triggered just by them telling their stories. One young girl, she said, I was 12 and they put me in isolation. I heard children screaming. I saw boys get strung out on meds. They make you take sleeping stuff in needles. They used pepper spray on this girl who was fighting directly in her mouth, and she couldn't breathe. The young woman that they did that to had asthma. Another one said, I went in when I was 14, and they have what they call the hole, where you only get a shower once a week and there's no heat. It's awful. I mean, it's awful. Children have just as many conditions of confinement complaints. There's no effort at helping them mature, become stable, contributing members of society. It's all harm.
Can you explain Prison Watch's overall role in addressing these dire problems concerning incarceration?
The American Friends Service Committee is a Quaker-based organization. And our efforts are monitoring human rights abuses, monitoring and advocacy. So the monitoring part is the phone calls and the letters that we receive from imprisoned people and their family members. Family members are really the best advocates. And we also have in New Jersey, we're very fortunate to have advocacy groups of those who were formerly incarcerated, returned citizens. It's monitoring and advocacy, and the advocacy part is two distinct ways. One, New Jersey has what they call an Office of the Ombudsperson. So we report any complaints we get to the Office of the Ombudsperson, the Department of Corrections, the administrators, wherever we have to insert ourselves, we do. And the program has been doing this for over 40 years, so that we have some juice. I can't change the system, but I can help an individual change their experience if I complain. The advocacy also takes, and I described it before, where we move legislation forward. We belong to coalitions of people and groups. Salvation and Social Justice is African religious leaders, the Latino Action Network, obvious. They're comprised of the Latino community. There are any number of groups in New Jersey that we coalesce with to change conditions of confinement and push through legislation that needs to be pushed through.
I understand that another part of Prison Watch is art. Can you talk about Nicole Fleetwood's Marking Time?
I met Nicole, well, I think before that, the art that has been sent to me from imprisoned people is spectacular. I've used that art in all of our publications, and we have published, aside from our Children's House and aside from the Survivor's Manual, we've published on elders, we've published a lot of commentary and a lot of resource manuals. And I've used the art that imprisoned people send me. Very often the envelopes that letters come in are spectacularly decorated. And people are welcome to come see our offices in Newark, New Jersey. I met Nicole when she was teaching at Rutgers, and Ojiri was out, and Ojiri is a collage maker. This was one of his methods of survival for those 22 years in solitary. And he brought his art, I brought the art of many other people, including a man named Todd Tarselli. If you look at any of the publications, Todd's very graphic, very spectacular drawings are usually on the cover. Nicole saw these and held a conference, held a gathering, and some of the people who came were people who were released, who were artists. And that community grew. And Nicole, from her own experience with her own family, wrote a book called Marking Time, Art in the Age of Incarceration, that led to an art exhibit at the Museum of Modern Art about 3 years ago. It led to another exhibit at the Schoenberg. It has traveled, that art exhibit, which is huge, profoundly moving, has been at several universities. I believe it's now at an art installation on a reservation, an indigenous reservation in Canada. And I'm hoping it continues traveling. but sometimes the art is better than the words. So even if you look at the collages, you'll see that he had to tear some of the pieces that he used to create the collages. It makes a difference in the lives of the creators. Creative people want to create, talented people want to share their talent. And it certainly makes a difference in the lives of those of us on the receiving end to be able to tell their story. And it's always from the inside out, as opposed to the other way around. All our knowledge, all our ability to articulate what's going on in there comes from the inside out.
What are some large-scale changes you think need to be made in order to see some real progress when it comes to incarceration?
The whole system, from who we arrest, right through parole, needs changing. One small example when we look at parole is that people who are paroled, and it's a very difficult, humiliating, unjust process, but people who are vetted and do get paroled, should they make a non-criminal mistake, like not calling a parole officer on time, or couch surfing because they've lost an apartment, or having a dirty urine. I mean, all of these things could be handled by parole officers. What happens is when they make those errors, they are sent back to prison. Now, these are people who've already been vetted. They're okay for the streets. They're sent back to prison. And right now in New Jersey, there are 1,300 people in prison on what they call technical parole violations. This is just one tiny piece of the system that needs to be changed. We've introduced legislation to say those folks aren't going to be imprisoned. They'll be helped. If you have a dirty urine, send them to a drug treatment facility. Help them get an apartment. Help them get a job. But the parole officers very often have the same attitude as correctional police, and that, it's a non-helpful role. It's a very, I keep using the word oppression. It's a very oppressive role, and it's not helpful.
And if there's one thing that people take away from today's video, what should it be?
To look at themselves and their own biases. And I believe in social change. I've spent my life working for social change, whether it was during the civil rights era or what I do now. I think particularly young people need to form that army of social change movements, no matter what the issues are. We don't want this world as it is now.
Thank you so much for listening. I hope this podcast has served as an educational tool in learning about incarceration, and even more so as a beacon of hope in a world that often feels encompassed by darkness. Remember to stay hopeful out there.